Okay, so there are two ways to create an empty project with the universal render pipeline that's ready to develop on. One way is to start with the sample project template from within the UnityHub to then create a new empty scene, open the scene, remove the example assets, left with a empty shell of a project that you can build in. The other way is to take a core 3D project, as in the built-in 3D renderer, install the universal render pipeline package, and then configure the project to use that package. Let's now have a look at how to do each of these approaches. Having messed up having captured the wrong camera when I was working with David on ripping out the sample scene and just leaving the URP parts of the template, I'm just going to do that part again. So starting with a URP 3D sample scene, which is what we had before. Now, so this will be, I'll call it overview 2. Okay, give that a minute. Let it create the project and launch Unity. I'll pause the recording for a second. Alright, so here we have the Unity editor started up, and we have our sample scene, which they promised us. So now what do we have? It means we have a few packages that this has installed by default, which includes the Scriptable render pipeline and the universal scriptable render pipeline, which we will see under packages, all the elements that have been installed by default with this. Now, let's take a look at this. So remember, all the project is under the assets folder. In here we'll have scenes, and that's where this sample scene is located. There will be material. Okay, so there's material for the skybox, which is the sky up here. Okay, presets, which are some settings, which are to do with the way the graphics is working. It'll be interesting to see what that is. We can find where that is located or used. Settings. In fact, if we look at, so you get different quality settings which you can set up. If we look at this, we might find okay. Alright, so these are assets that represent settings for the URP itself. Sample scene profiled. Okay, so this is to do with the volume profile. So it's to do with the way the lighting renders inside the scene. Not exactly lighting, but okay, as we can see, should be post-processing effects, I believe, because of the vignette, bloom, and tone mapping. Alright, so scripts. So the simple camera controller, which would be a script in the scene, and probably if we look at our scene here, actually if we look at the main camera, the simple camera controller is the component on here which is setting or controlling the actual what the camera's looking at. It looks like it's set up for interesting things, but anyway, what else? Tutorial info. Now in here we will find, here's the actual code. So let's have a quick look at this. This is the actual code that draws the README scene, or the README. There we go. So this is so it has the Unity editor namespace as well as the Unity engine. This is the thing that actually draws the custom editor component onto Inspector GUI. Yes. Okay. So if I go back to Unity for a second, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. From this README here. This README here is actually an asset, which is why it says README.asset. And this is what this is being rendered in the inspector as this. It's this code that is driving that behavior of how that's driven, see how that's viewed. So you can see on inspector GUI. So this is drawing a special version of the inspector where we have some labels. So for instance, so for a README asset, so there's a README class in here. Let's have a look. Label, okay, style, section tag. Some of these things will come from the actual asset. Yes. So for instance, the asset itself will be, well, that is the asset. This text will have been edited somewhere else and essentially is providing, you know, this body of the text, and this is really just controlling the way it's rendered. Okay, so this is a layer. Okay, so hold on. This is all being used so as stylized widgets in the view: link style, title style, heading style, body style. So these are all like custom GUI elements for this README view. So anyway, this is just an example of how the editor can be extended. So you can have like a very custom looking inspector view. This is useless, it's literally read only. There's the link style. So it's not a great demonstration of a custom editor component or editor view, but that's what it is. Okay, so in terms of what we keep, we don't need the scene. We want to create our own scene. We mostly don't need the materials because all those materials are used here. The models are used here. Prefabs, all the shaders and so forth. So there's very little here that we want to keep. There's other materials. There's just the skybox, which we don't need either. We probably don't need those, but I would leave them for the moment. We can use the scenes folder, but we'll make our own scene. Scripts, we can get rid of that. Settings, we will leave that because that's the configuration of the universal render pipeline that's been set up, and so we'll just continue to use that. And this tutorial info stuff we won't need because that's really just giving this useless sort of README view, which is just describing what the sample's all about. So let's rip through this now and sort of pull out the parts we don't want. So first of all, in the scene, right, we're going to create a new scene. So create scene. There it is there. So we'll call this David's scene, like this. If I double click on it or if I hit enter, we're now in that scene, which means I can now delete those. Now that I've deleted those, nothing else is referring to that, so I can delete the example assets, or nothing's relying on it. Delete the example assets. I can at least delete that material and leave the folder. The folder's useful. Let's see, scripts. Very well, I don't like calling it scripts anyway. Settings we'll leave. The tutorial info is the part we don't need, so we'll get rid of that. Okay, so now we have pretty much an almost empty project with just the packages that were pre-installed, so we can continue using those. Now, all right, so at this point we can begin. There's another way of creating a project for Universal Render Pipeline, which is to start with just a 3D core project like we have here, which I've given the name of Overview 3, and once you've created that project, you can that'll be using the built-in renderer, not the render pipeline. And once you have that renderer in place, you can replace it with the universal render pipeline or the high definition one. So you can actually choose that. The difference is you'll probably have to set up. You will have to set up some settings. The Unity manual actually explains how to do it, but you end up with a fresh project, with no extra examples and strange settings that you don't understand what they're for. So that's the benefit of doing it. There's a few things we'll need to install the universal render pipeline as a package using the package manager, and then we can configure the project to use it, and then we'll need to set up URP to be configured. So that's what we'll need to do to finish all this finish all it off, and that will demonstrate the package manager and demonstrate a few other things at the same time. So it's a worthwhile exercise. Okay, so let's find the instructions from help. So Unity manual, and then from here we can search universal render pipeline. So render should do the job. Now pipelines, universal RP. Now player settings, it'll be part of it, and if I switching, see if I can negative, choosing your no, okay, so let's see what we have here. Those player settings, wrong one, not universal window, that's not helpful at all. Universal render pipeline, compatibility, using, that's what I want. Using, excellent. Okay, so you can use either the universal render pipeline or the high definition one. So let's see. I got configure. Let's say using. Okay, let's. Yep, that's right. We don't want to do. Well, actually, let's go back. Okay, let's go there. So we're just following this link to the URP documentation microsite, which is probably for the package. Yes, this looks like it's for the package. So getting started upgrading. Here we go. Yeah, it used to be called the LWRP. All right, so now getting started. What's new? Hold on. Yep. Install into an existing project. This is the one we want. Okay. So an integrated post-processing solution, so that's all fine. So let's, alright, package manager. Yep, that's what they're saying there. And they're also saying we might have to delete the post-processing version 2 package. I doubt we'll have that. Let's check for that first. So under expand the packages thing, not seeing it. And we can double check by going to the package manager. So this is for the packages that are in the project. It's getting a list ready for us. And yeah, so this matches what we see here. There's no post-processing version 2 installed, so that's terrific. So now let's switch this to the Unity registry so we can see the uninstalled packages. Yeah, well, come here. Now we want to go to Universal RP, render pipeline, and we'll install that by clicking the install button. So this is following this instruction. So yeah, we've got the package manager open. We've selected Universal RP. We're hitting install, and then the next step will be to configure it. Now the way this works is when they're talking about creating an asset, this is creating, okay, effectively it's a scriptable object, which is a whole other topic, but it's basically a way of creating some serialized data as an asset that's stored in the project that configures the render pipeline. So that's what that really means, and there's a way of configuring that. So we have that installed now. So let's do this, right? So configuring. Before you can start using it, you need to configure it. Terrific. To do this, you need to create a scriptable render pipeline asset and adjust your graphics settings. Okay, so I'm going to open that in another tab. I love me a bunch of tabs. Okay, that didn't help that much. Oh, okay. So to create an asset. Let's be impatient. It is a scriptable object. Yes, just like I said, when you assign the asset built and render it to the URP, you need to adjust the corresponding settings, which is what the asset's for. Multiple URP assets, which is for different qualities. You can have one with shadows on, one with shadows off, right? So different views, which you could potentially switch in game, I believe, like once the gameplay started. Okay, so how to show additional properties. We want to create the asset, guys. If you have the 2D renderer enabled graphic settings, okay, I think we should end up with a new, it'll be under rendering, no, under pipeline, here we go. So this, having installed the Universal Render Pipeline package, this will be a new menu item. So from here we can do, actually this doesn't help us, this is not it, but that should be new. Where is it? Let's create rendering. This is what, here we go. Pipeline asset. Okay. Okay, I've put it in the wrong spot, but anyway. So let's call this basic URP settings. Now this is in, okay, that was interesting. Right, cool. Now that is not the folder I want to put it in, so let's make a new folder and call it URP settings. URP settings, and we will move those into there. Okay, so I have two folders here, one for scenes and one for the URP settings. If I click on this, I should, in the inspector, see the things I can set up, which will be what they're talking about here. In terms of an URP, you can configure settings for. This should be this, so rendering, quality, lighting, shadows. So let's see if that's what we have here. Quality, so renderer list. Yes, the forward renderer, depth, texture. So there's going to be different ways to configure. Okay, that can be useful, but we'll leave things mostly default to start with. HDR, that's interesting. High dynamic range, we could leave that on. Actually, I'll turn that off for now. Render scale 1 is good. Lighting. Okay, what else do we have? Shadows, which is actually interesting, so you can make the shadows maybe a bit more convincing. Sometimes the shadows look a bit not great around the edges, so maybe that, yeah, so it'd be interesting to play with those sorts of things. For instance, grading mode, what else? Advanced, dynamic batching. So actually these are things that you can use to optimize the performance in terms of draw calls potentially, to make the actual FPS up. You know, you might be able to squeeze a bit more performance out of the game loop by tuning some of this stuff, which is, you know, playing that trade-off between quality and yeah, performance basically. Right, so let's say depth. Yeah, so okay. The good thing is they have explanations here for what this does, so we don't have to guess too much, but that's fine. So this will be fairly basic. Let's go with that for now. So now the next track will be in the project settings. So installing, configuring. So we've done this part. Yeah, assets, create, rendering. Yeah, that's what we did. That's fine. Where's the other step? Project settings, graphics, scriptable. Yeah, this is the one. Okay. So project settings, graphics, scriptable render pipeline settings. So this is the thing. So if I drag, I should be able to just drag this into there and kind of call it a day, right? So new settings will not be used. Okay, that's fine. So this is referring to the stuff below here. I think that's all we need to do. When you add the available graphic settings, immediately change. Your project is now using URP. So we should be in business now. This should now be using URP. Okay. And so these settings probably won't be taking effect anymore. It should actually be happening through these settings down here in terms of what guides, the way the graphics, post-processing and so forth, how that works. Okay, so that is basically how you set up your universal render pipeline from a simple 3D project, rather than going through the other way that I did before of use the URP template and then rip out the stuff you don't want from the example scene and so forth. So this is a simple empty template which is just configured for basic settings, and you can always make more elaborate configurations for different levels of quality. So that's it there, and the example, as you saw, I just searched through the Unity manual to find this page, and then from there went to the URP and documentation website, microsite, and that's where we found out how to configure the settings in the URP, and then how to configure the project settings to use URP instead, or scriptable render pipeline. And so there we are. So you might wonder, how can we tell if we're using the built-in 3D rendering, or if we're using one of the scriptable render pipelines, like the universal render pipeline package. So right now I have a URP cube with a material configured for URP, and another, I have a sphere that's just configured to use the built-in render. And how can you tell the differences? If we look at the materials, the built-in one is using the standard from the standard shader. So the standard is for the built-in 3D rendering approach, and the URP material is using universal render pipeline shaders, family of shaders, and in there we can see there's a number of different lighting approaches, like baked lighting, complex lighting, sort of a simple lighting, regular lighting, simple lighting, unlit, and so forth. So different standard shaders that come with the universal render pipeline. So when it's pink like this means the shader is failing to work, and that's because we're not using the universal render pipeline. So literally Unity doesn't know how to render this material. If I go to the 3D settings, the scriptable render pipeline settings, because this is set to none, which is like null, it's basically using the built-in renderer. If I go to, where are we, settings? Yep, this is where the assets for that configure the URP are basically stored. This is from the sample, the sample project created through UnityHub. So if I drag one of these assets into here in the graphic settings, it now switches, and we can see that the cube, which is using URP material, now renders correctly, and the built-in 3D sphere now fails to render. So this is how we can tell which render pipeline or built-in engine, which rendering approach is being used, whether it's scriptable or not.